At family gathering, my husband ordered my mother to cook. Then my billionaire brother stepped in. The chandelier above shimmered, scattering light across the glossy wooden table, but all I could see was humiliation burning inside me. My pulse pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My husband, Daniel, leaned back in his chair with that smug grin he always wore whenever he wanted to remind me of my place. The room was filled with laughter and chatter, yet when his voice cut through, sharp as a whip, everything froze. "Linda," he called to my mother across the table. His tone laced with mockery. "Why are you standing there? Go to the kitchen and start helping. That's what you're good at, isn't it?" Silence. A silence so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Everyone at that table turned to look. Some shifted uncomfortably, some smirked, but no one defended her. Not one. My mother's frail hands trembled as she clutched her old purse tighter against her chest. She had put on her best outfit for tonight, a navy blue dress she had pressed again and again to make it look new. But compared to the shimmering gowns, diamond necklaces, and designer suits around us, she might as well have been in rags. "That's what people like her are meant for, the kitchen," sneered Caroline, Daniel's mother, her laugh echoing cruelly around the room. She waved a perfectly manicured hand toward my mother as if dismissing a servant. "At least she'll be useful for something tonight." Across the table, Daniel's sister, Amanda, smirked at me, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. "Some people just need to know their place, don't they, Emily?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. Heat rushed to my cheeks, my eyes stung, but my lips stayed sealed. I had learned silence after 3 years of marriage into the Rivers family. Silence was survival. My feelings didn't matter. My voice wasn't needed. My family was something to be endured at best, ridiculed at worst. And yet, something shifted inside me that night. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and the room's energy shifted instantly. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks and glasses hovered in mid-air. The sound of footsteps, steady and commanding, echoed across the marble entryway. Everyone turned their heads. A man entered. Tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit that looked more expensive than the chandelier above us. His presence filled the space so effortlessly that it seemed the air itself bent around him. His dark hair was neatly combed, his jawline sharp, and his eyes that missed nothing, swept across the table. My breath caught in my throat. Those eyes. I knew them. Older now, hardened by years, but still familiar. Daniel's father, Robert, scrambled to his feet. The rest of the Rivers family followed, plastering fake smiles across their faces. Daniel's own smirk faltered, replaced by nervous surprise. "Mr. Adrian. What a surprise." Daniel stuttered, his voice unusually high. We didn't know you'd be here tonight. What an honor to have you join us." Caroline rushed forward, her earlier cruelty dissolving into a sugary sweetness that made me want to gag. "Adrian Cole, the billionaire," she gushed. "Oh my goodness, what brings you to our humble dinner?" "Humble." Adrian's voice was calm but carried through the room like steel. His eyes scanned everything, the ornate decor, the silver trays, the elaborate meal spread across the table. Then his gaze landed on me. Time stopped. My chest tightened, my vision blurred with tears I didn't even realize were forming. Those eyes. The same ones that comforted me when I cried as a child. The same ones I had watched through a plane window 15 years ago when he left to chase a dream. "Adrian!" I whispered, my voice trembling. And then he smiled. Not the polite, distant smile he'd offered everyone else. A real smile. Warm, protective, filled with recognition. "Hello, little sister." Gasps rippled across the room like a wave. The Rivers family froze, their faces draining of color as the reality hit them like a brick wall. My husband's jaw dropped open. His eyes flicked between Adrian and me, trying to piece together the truth. Adrian's expression hardened. His gaze swept over the table, over my mother's trembling hands, over me sitting frozen in my chair. Then he looked at Daniel. "How dare you?" Adrian's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but the menace in it made the room tremble. Before anyone could react, his fist shot out. Daniel didn't even see it coming. The blow landed square on his jaw with a sickening crack. My husband crumpled to the floor, clutching his face as blood dripped down his chin. Caroline shrieked. Amanda stumbled backward, nearly toppling her chair. Guests pressed themselves against the wall, pale with fear. And I sat there frozen, watching the man I had loved once reduced to nothing in seconds. Watching the chains around my heart start to break. Watching the brother I thought I had lost forever return like a storm to shatter everything. You want to know how I got here? How the girl who once believed love could conquer anything ended up trapped in this house of cruelty? Let me take you back. Back to where it all began. Back to when I thought Daniel Rivers was my savior instead of my cage. Before Adrian walked into that room and shattered the chains I had been living with, I was just Emily Cole. A girl who once believed love was enough. A daughter who watched her mother sacrifice everything, yet still smiled through her pain. A sister who clung to the memory of her brother's promises, even when the years stretched too long and silence grew heavier than hope. Growing up, we didn't have much. Our apartment was tiny, the paint peeling from the walls, the heater clanking through winter nights. But what we lacked in wealth we had in love. My mother, Linda, was the strongest woman I knew. Every morning before the sun even rose, she slipped out of the apartment to catch the first bus across town. She scrubbed floors, dusted shelves, and polished silverware for families who never even bothered to remember her name. I used to wait by the window in the evenings, watching for her figure climbing the worn-out steps, her hands rough and red from chemicals, her knees aching, her face tired. Yet, she never once complained. She'd drop her purse on the table, kiss me on the forehead, and say the same words every night. Education is your ticket out, sweetheart. You and Adrian will have the life I never did. I promise you that. Adrian was 2 years older than me, and even back then he was different. While kids his age spent afternoons kicking balls or playing video games, Adrian dug into old magazines he pulled from recycling bins. I'd find him under the flickering light bulb in our living room, flipping through pages about business, finance, and stories of men who built empires from nothing. His eyes burned with an intensity one didn't understand at the time. I'm going to be rich one day, Em, he'd tell me as we walked to school past cracked sidewalks and boarded-up houses. Really rich. And when I am, Mom will never scrub another floor again. And you'll never have to worry about anything. And I believed him. Not because he said it, but because when Adrian made a promise, it was like hearing the future being written. The day he left for college was one of the hardest of my life. He had earned a full scholarship, and Mom was so proud she could hardly speak without crying. At the bus station, he hugged me so tightly I couldn't breathe. His voice trembled when he whispered in my ear, "Take care of Mom until I come back. This isn't goodbye, Em. I'll be back for you both. I swear." I wanted to believe it. I did. But days became months, months became years. At first, he called every week. Then once a month. Then only on birthdays. And then nothing. 5 long years passed without a single word. Mom would still set an extra plate at Christmas, still wrap birthday gifts for him that sat untouched in her closet. Each year her hope dimmed just a little more, but she never admitted it. "He's busy, Emily," she'd say softly when I asked why he didn't call. "Success takes time. Your brother is building something. He hasn't forgotten us." But I wasn't so sure. I told myself maybe he had changed. Maybe money had turned him into someone else. Maybe we were nothing but shadows from a life he wanted to leave behind. And that's when Daniel Rivers walked into my life. I was 23, working at a restaurant downtown, juggling shifts while finishing my degree in education. It wasn't glamorous, but the tips kept the lights on, and Mom was so proud when I graduated. I still remember her tears as I crossed that stage to collect my diploma, clapping so hard she almost bruised her palms. Then one rainy night in November, Daniel appeared at my table. He was tall, confident, handsome in that polished way men in magazines looked. Blonde hair, sharp suit, the kind of presence that made people turn and stare. But what struck me wasn't his appearance. It was the way he spoke to me. He asked about my day, listened like it mattered, smiled like I was the only person in the room. And when he left, he tipped more than most people spent on dinner. He came back. Again and again. Always asking for my section. Always with that charming smile. Always with words that made me feel seen. "You're too smart to be waiting tables forever," he said once. His eyes steady on mine as I refilled his coffee. "What do you really want to do?" I told him about teaching, about wanting to work with kids who came from backgrounds like mine. About believing education could change lives. He listened with such intensity, I felt like I was worth something for the first time in my life. "That's beautiful," he said. His voice so warm I felt tears sting my eyes. "The world needs more people like you, Emily. People who care." Felt like magic. After years of watching my mother suffer, after years of feeling invisible, this man looked at me like I mattered. Like I wasn't just the daughter of a cleaning lady. Like I was someone who deserved more. And when he held my hand across that table, I thought maybe, just maybe, he was the one who would finally save me. But I had no idea then that Daniel wasn't my salvation. He was my cage. The first months with Daniel felt like living inside a dream I didn't deserve. He swept me into a world I had only seen from the outside. Expensive restaurants where the menus didn't even show prices, designer stores where saleswomen looked at me like I didn't belong until Daniel's credit card silenced them, parties where people wore diamonds like they were just another accessory. I wasn't used to any of it. For years I had counted coins at the grocery store, praying we'd have enough for bread and milk. Now suddenly, I was being driven in sleek cars, wearing dresses I could never afford, dining in places that smelled like wealth. Daniel made me feel chosen. Like I had been lifted out of my old life and placed into one that was finally bright. When he met my mother for the first time, I was terrified. Our apartment was small and shabby compared to his world. The wallpaper peeled in the corners, the furniture was second-hand, the heater rattled every time it came on. I worried he would look down on us. But Daniel surprised me. He complimented my mom's cooking, carried her grocery bags upstairs, even laughed with our elderly neighbor in the hallway. "He's a good man," my mom whispered that night in the kitchen. "Kind. Generous. You deserve this happiness, sweetheart." And I believed her. Because in those moments I believed him too. 2 years later, when he got down on one knee with a diamond ring that sparkled like starlight, I said yes without a second of doubt. The wedding was like something from a magazine. Flowers everywhere, music, people whose names I'd only ever read in society columns. His family welcomed me warmly, or so I thought. Caroline kissed both my cheeks and called me daughter. Amanda giggled and said she always wanted a sister. Even Robert, his stern father, shook my hand firmly and told me how lucky I was to marry his son. I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. But fairy tales end the moment the last dance fades. The first crack appeared on our honeymoon in Italy. The view was breathtaking. Blue seas stretching endlessly, the smell of salt and lemon groves in the air. I remember sitting across from Daniel at dinner, thinking this was the happiest moment of my life. Then casually as he cut into his steak, he said something that made my fork freeze midair. "Mother thinks you should quit teaching now that we're married," he said. His voice was calm, like he was talking about the weather. "It doesn't really fit our lifestyle. River's wives don't work. They focus on family, charity events, social functions." I almost choked on my wine. Quit teaching? But Daniel, you know how much it means to me. You told me you admired that about me. He reached across the table, patted my hand gently like I was a child who didn't understand. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes had something colder in them. "I did admire it," he said smoothly. "But that was before we were married. Things are different now. You're a Rivers. There are expectations. Your dreams are my dreams now. Emily. Isn't that enough?" His words sat like a stone in my chest. A part of me wanted to argue, to remind him of all the nights I'd studied by candlelight, of how I wanted to change children's lives. But another part of me, the part still dizzy from love, still desperate to belong, told me maybe he was right. Maybe this was what it meant to be a wife in his family. When we returned home, I handed in my resignation. My first classroom, the place that had made me feel alive, was gone. I told myself I could help in other ways. Charity events. Fundraisers. But in truth, a piece of me was already slipping away. The months that followed were a blur of polished masks. Caroline would comment on how I dressed. Amanda would joke about my small-town background. Daniel would laugh along when they teased me about once thinking Olive Garden was fancy. I smiled, I laughed, I pretended. But every time, something inside me shrank a little more. And then the rules began. Don't wear that color. It's too flashy for a Rivers. Don't talk about your childhood. It makes people uncomfortable. Don't mention your mother's job. Just say she's retired. One day, Daniel hired a stylist without even asking me. My hair was chopped, my clothes replaced with outfits I could barely recognize myself in. When I looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back. Much better, Caroline said approvingly. Now you finally look like you belong in this family. But did I? Did I belong in a family that looked at my mother like she was less than human? The first Christmas after our wedding gave me the answer. Our home was decorated beautifully, every corner glittering with lights, a tree that touched the ceiling. Guests filled the house. Business partners, family friends, relatives. My mother arrived early, smiling, carrying homemade food she'd worked hard on. She loved being part of celebrations. She wanted to feel included. But instead of welcoming her, Caroline put her straight to work. Linda, peel those potatoes, will you? And make sure they're washed properly. I don't want dirt on my china. The words stung, but my mother didn't argue. She just nodded, rolled up her sleeves, and worked in the kitchen while the rest of us celebrated in the dining room. When I tried to help her, Amanda pulled me aside with a smirk. Let her work. It's what she's good at. That night, after everyone left, I found my mom sitting on the edge of the guest bed. She still wore her apron. Tears streaked her face. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she whispered when she saw me. I didn't mean to embarrass you. Embarrass me? My throat tightened. Mom, you have nothing to apologize for. They were horrible to you. She looked down at her hands. Maybe I shouldn't come to these things. Maybe I don't belong here. I don't want to cause trouble for you and Daniel. I wanted to scream that she was wrong. That she had every right to be there. That Daniel's family was the problem. But instead, I stayed silent. Because a small, ugly part of me felt relief. If she stayed away, I wouldn't have to watch them humiliate her. I could pretend everything was fine. And so, I said nothing. That silence was the first step toward losing myself completely. 3 years. That was how long I lived in the Rivers mansion, playing the perfect wife while losing myself a little more each day. 3 years of waking up in silk sheets but feeling hollow inside. 3 years of swallowing every insult, every cruel laugh, every sideways glance that told me I didn't belong. From the outside, my life looked perfect. Designer clothes hung in my closet. My days were filled with luncheons, charity events, fundraisers. People saw me smiling on Daniel's arm at galas and whispered about how lucky I was to have married into such a powerful family. But behind those photographs and polished appearances, there was another truth. Every dinner was the same dance. Caroline would find a way to criticize me. My dress wasn't flattering, my hair was too plain, my laugh too loud. Amanda would smirk and make little comments about my past, reminding me that no matter how expensive my jewelry was, I'd always be that girl from the poor side of town. Daniel either joined in with a chuckle or stayed silent, which somehow hurt even more. And my mother. My sweet mother. Every time she visited, she was pushed toward the kitchen. Sometimes they didn't even set a place for her at the table. She would sit by the counter, eating quietly, pretending not to notice the way they talked over her like she was invisible. It's more comfortable for her there, Caroline would say with a smile that cut deeper than knives. She's not used to formal dining anyway. I would sit there, my throat burning, my heart screaming at me to stand up for her. But my lips stayed shut. Because by then, I had learned that silence kept the peace. Silence meant survival. At night, when Daniel slept peacefully beside me, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed of teaching children, of making a difference. I thought about Adrian and wondered if he ever thought of me. I wondered if he remembered the promises he made to Mom, to me. Or if we were just chapters he had closed in his book of success. Those were the nights when the rage bubbled inside me. Hot, fierce, uncontrollable. But I buried it. Because Good River's wives didn't get angry. They didn't argue. They smiled. They stayed quiet. Still little cracks kept forming. One afternoon, I overheard Caroline on the phone with a friend. She didn't know I was in the next room. She's doing better, she said lightly. Still has some rough edges, of course. You can't completely erase where she came from. But at least she stopped talking about that silly teaching nonsense. Daniel's trained her well. Trained. Like I was some dog who had finally learned to sit when commanded. The worst part wasn't their words. It was that, after a while I started to believe them. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a charity case Daniel had rescued. Maybe I was nothing more than a girl who should be grateful for what she had. Maybe my dreams really didn't matter. I stopped looking in the mirror because the woman staring back wasn't me anymore. She was polished, elegant, quiet, everything the Rivers family wanted her to be. But her eyes were empty. My mother still came around, still tried to fit in. She spent hours pressing her dresses, buying small pieces of jewelry she couldn't afford, trying desperately to be seen as worthy. But no matter how much effort she put in, Caroline and Amanda found ways to tear her down. "Oh, Linda, still shopping at thrift stores?" Amanda would say with fake sympathy. "Emily, you should really take your mother somewhere decent. It's embarrassing." Mom would smile weakly, her hands trembling as she smoothed her dress. And every time, I wanted to scream. I wanted to protect her. But my voice had been buried so deep, I couldn't find it anymore. Then came the night of Daniel's big celebration. He had just made partner at his law firm, and Caroline insisted on throwing a lavish dinner. Judges, politicians, business leaders, everyone who mattered was invited. Daniel told me that morning, his tone sharp as a warning. "This night is important, Emily. Don't say anything foolish. No awkward stories about your past. I need you to be perfect." I swallowed hard. "You mean, no being myself?" For a second, his eyes flickered with something almost like regret. But it vanished just as quickly. "Don't be dramatic. You know what I mean." That evening, my mother arrived early, carrying a homemade cake she had spent all day preparing. She had bought a new dress too. Not expensive, but neat and pressed. She looked nervous, but hopeful, like maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. Caroline glanced at the cake and forced a smile. "How thoughtful, Linda. But I'm not sure we'll have room for it with everything the caterers have prepared. Why don't you set it in the kitchen? Oh, and while you're there, could you help arrange the appetizers?" I saw my mother's shoulders slump. Her eyes dimmed. But she just nodded and walked quietly into the kitchen. Because poverty teaches you to swallow your pride, even when it kills you inside. The evening carried on with laughter and clinking glasses while my mother scrubbed dishes in the background. At one point, I overheard two of the wives whispering about me. "Emily looks tired," one said. "Well, you know her background," the other replied with a smirk. "Daniel's done wonders with her, but you can only polish a stone so much." I excused myself and walked to the bathroom. The mirror reflected a woman in a beautiful dress, her makeup flawless, her smile perfect. But her eyes were hollow. Who was I? What had I become? And that's when something inside me stirred. That rage I had buried for 3 long years clawed its way back to the surface. For the first time, I wasn't sure I could push it down again. The night of Daniel's celebration still burns in my memory like a scar. Everyone in the dining room was glowing with laughter and praise, raising glasses to Daniel's success. He stood at the center of it all, his voice booming as he entertained his colleagues with stories of his legal victories. I tried to play my role. I smiled when people looked at me, nodded at their conversations, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. But my mind wasn't in that room. It was in the kitchen. With my mother. Every time the swinging door opened, I caught glimpses of her, hair pinned back neatly, hands moving quickly as she carried trays, her face flushed from the heat of the stove. She wasn't a guest. She was a worker in her own daughter's home. I wanted to run to her, to pull her out of there, to scream at them all for what they were doing. But I stayed in my seat, frozen, pretending to be perfect. "Emily looks tired," I heard one of the wives whisper behind me. "Well, adjusting to this lifestyle isn't easy for people like her," another replied with a laugh. "Daniel's done wonders with her, but you can't polish a stone too much." Their words stabbed through me like knives. I excused myself quickly and rushed to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror stared back at me with hollow eyes. She wore an expensive dress, her lipstick flawless, her hair styled perfectly, but there was nothing behind her smile. I pressed my hands against the sink, trembling. Who was I now? Where had the real me gone, the girl who wanted to teach, who believed in changing lives, who loved with all her heart? She was gone. Replaced by this shell. A polished shell with no voice. A knock came at the door. Daniel's voice. Impatient. "Emily, people are asking for you. Come back out." I forced myself to return. I forced the smile back onto my face. But something inside me had shifted. The rage I had buried for 3 years was stirring, clawing at my chest. And then it happened. I was standing near the doorway when I heard Daniel's laugh. Loud, careless, cruel. He was surrounded by his colleagues, and my blood ran cold as his words reached me. "You should see Emily's mother in action," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Put that woman in a kitchen and she's in her element. It's like she was born to serve." The men around him burst into laughter. Someone joked about knowing your place in life. Another said something about how refreshing it was to see someone embrace good, honest work. Their voices full of arrogance, their eyes full of superiority. I froze. My hands shook so badly the plates I was holding nearly slipped. Through the glass pane of the kitchen door, I saw my mother. She had heard every word. She tried to keep her face calm, but her lips trembled. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. And that broke me. It wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't just about the insults I had endured, the silence I had swallowed, the pieces of myself I had sacrificed. It was about her. My mother, the strongest woman I knew. The woman who had carried me through hunger, who had worked herself to the bone just so I could dream. And here she was, being laughed at like she was nothing. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. I set down the plates, my fingers trembling, and walked quickly to the hallway. My purse hung on the hook by the door. My heart pounded as I pulled out my phone. My hands shook so much I could barely scroll through my contacts, searching for a number I hadn't dialed in over 10 years. Adrian. My brother's number was still there. My thumb hovered over it. For years I had told myself he had forgotten us. That success had turned him into someone new. But in that moment, I didn't care. With a deep breath, I typed the words. "It's Emily. I need you." I didn't know if he would see it. I didn't know if he even kept the same number. I didn't know if he cared anymore. But I pressed send. The party ended hours later. The guests left, drunk on wine and self-satisfaction. Daniel was beaming, proud of how well everything had gone. My mother had cleaned until her hands were red and raw, and when she finally sat down, she looked smaller than ever. Daniel didn't notice. He kissed my cheek lightly, satisfied with his evening, and went upstairs to bed. I sat in the darkened kitchen, staring at my phone, my chest tight with hope and fear. Minutes felt like hours. Then hours passed with nothing. My heart sank with every tick of the clock. And then, long after midnight, my phone buzzed. One message. Short. Simple. "I'll be there tomorrow night. Don't do anything until I arrive." I read those words again and again until my vision blurred with tears. After 15 years of silence, my brother was coming home. And God helped the Rivers family when he did. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Every minute crawled by like it was dragging chains behind it. I moved through the day the way someone walks through fog. Slow, disoriented, heavy. Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy celebrating his new title, bragging on the phone to colleagues, already planning golf trips with judges and dinners with politicians. His world was perfect. He had no idea mine was falling apart. At breakfast that morning, he sat across from me with his newspaper, sipping coffee like nothing in the world could touch him. He looked up at me once, his mouth curving into that patronizing smile he wore whenever he felt superior. "You did well last night," he said casually, as though complimenting a child for behaving. "Mother was impressed with how you handled the Wilsons." "I knew you wouldn't embarrass me." "The Wilsons?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Yes. Mrs. Wilson asked about your background, remember? And you didn't go into all those unnecessary details. Just said you were from a small town." "Perfect answer." I forced a smile. Inside, I felt like glass cracking under pressure. He didn't even realize that what he saw as perfect was actually me erasing myself, piece by piece. I nodded, pretending to agree. But inside I felt different. Something inside me had shifted forever the moment I pressed send on that text to Adrian. All day, I couldn't stop glancing at my phone, waiting for another message, terrified the first one had been a mistake. What if he didn't come? What if he had only sent those words to ease his conscience and then forgot about me again? But under that fear was something far more dangerous. Hope. The kind of hope I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. That evening, Daniel announced that his family would be coming over for another dinner. "Mother wants a more intimate celebration tonight," he explained as he loosened his tie. Just family this time. It'll be nice. My stomach clenched. Another night of watching my mother humiliated, treated like unpaid help while they smiled and laughed in her face. Should I invite my mom? I asked carefully, my voice neutral. Daniel hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. His jaw tightened. I suppose. But you know how mother feels about mixing different social circles. It's awkward for her. Different social circles. As if my mother was a disease that might spread to their perfect world. I'll call her, I said, not giving him a choice. That night, as I laid out the silverware on the long polished dining table, my hands trembled. Not from fear of Daniel's temper. Not from the humiliation I knew was waiting. But from the secret I carried inside me. Adrian was coming. The thought made me almost dizzy. The boy who once promised he'd never let me down. The brother who had disappeared into silence. The man the entire city now whispered about. Powerful, mysterious, untouchable. And he was walking back into my life tonight. The Rivers mansion sparkled as always. Chandeliers glittered, expensive wine poured into crystal glasses, laughter filled the air. Caroline wore a gown that shimmered under the lights like armor, her jewelry practically blinding. Amanda had brought her newest boyfriend, a trust fund heir who bragged about vacations and investments like it was small talk. Robert sat at the head of the table, his expression carved in stone, always watching, always judging. And my mother? She sat quietly at the far end of the table. She had worn her best dress again, the same navy one she had pressed until the fabric thinned. She even bought tiny pearl earrings with money she didn't have, hoping to look more respectable. But to the Rivers family, she would always be nothing more than the cleaning lady's shadow. The dinner dragged on. Caroline's voice rang out with her usual cutting remarks, disguised as politeness. "Linda, I hope you don't mind helping with next week's gathering," she said sweetly. "You're so good in the kitchen. It would be a waste not to use your talents." My mother nodded quietly, trying to hide the way her cheeks flushed red. She cut her food into tiny pieces to keep her hands from shaking. I gripped my napkins so hard my knuckles went white. Rage burned inside me. 3 years of silence pressed against my ribs, begging to be released. Then Daniel's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Linda!" He balked across the table, his tone sharp, commanding. "Eat quickly and get in the kitchen. The family wants dessert. That's what you're here for, isn't it?" The room fell silent. Forks hovered mid-air. My mother froze, clutching her purse tightly against her lap. Caroline laughed, the sound cruel. "At least she'll finally be useful for something." Amanda leaned forward, her eyes on me, her lips curling into a smirk. "Some people just know their place, don't they, Emily?" Their words stabbed through me. My face burned with shame and fury. For a split second, I wanted to scream, to throw my glass across the table, to tell them all exactly what they were. But I didn't. I smiled instead. Because I knew something they didn't. I had invited someone to dinner. "Actually," I said quietly, surprising even myself with how calm my voice sounded, "we're expecting another guest tonight." The room stilled. Caroline raised her eyebrows in disapproval. "Another guest? Emily, this is a family dinner. We can't just invite strangers." "Oh, he's not a stranger," I said, my voice steady. "And he's definitely family." Before anyone could question me, the doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the mansion like a warning bell. I felt a thrill run through me. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the whole table could hear it. Daniel pushed back his chair quickly, confusion written all over his face. "I'll get it," he said, trying to sound composed. From the hallway, I heard voices. Daniel's nervous laugh. A deeper, steady voice responding calmly. Footsteps approached. The dining room doors opened. And there he was. Adrian Cole. 15 years had changed him, but I would have recognized him anywhere. The boy with dreams in his eyes had become a man who commanded attention with every breath. His suit was perfectly tailored, his shoulders broad, his posture straight. But it wasn't his wealth or his presence that took my breath away. It was his eyes. Those same eyes that once promised me I'd never be alone. Caroline gasped, her fork clattering against her plate. Amanda's mouth fell open. Even Robert, always composed, looked shaken. Because they knew exactly who he was. Adrian Cole. The billionaire who built an empire from nothing. the man who held half the city in the palm of his hand. And now, standing in their dining room. "Good evening," Adrian said calmly, his gaze sweeping across the table before landing on me. Our eyes met. For the first time in years I felt seen. Truly seen. "Hello, little sister," he said softly. Gasps rippled through the room. My mother covered her mouth, tears spilling from her eyes. Daniel stood frozen, his face pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't form words. And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. The room froze when Adrian stepped inside. It wasn't just his presence. It was the weight of it. The Rivers family had built their identity around money, power, and reputation. They thought they were untouchable. But in that moment, facing Adrian Cole, they looked small. Almost fragile. Caroline's wine glass trembled in her hand, the ruby liquid sloshing dangerously close to the edge. Amanda sat stiff, her playful smirk wiped clean, her eyes darting nervously between her mother and Adrian. Even Robert, the man who rarely showed an ounce of emotion, shifted in his seat. His jaw tightened, his fingers drummed against the armrest of his chair. Daniel was the worst. His face had gone pale, his confident mask slipping with every passing second. He stood rooted to the spot, his voice caught in his throat. Adrian," he stammered, his hands twitching like he didn't know what to do with them. "This is unexpected." Adrian's gaze moved slowly across the table, pausing on each face, unreadable. Then his eyes landed on my mother. She sat at the far end of the table, her hands clasped tightly together, tears streaking down her cheeks. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at him like she was afraid he might vanish if she blinked. Adrian's voice softened, but it carried across the entire room. "Hello, Mom." The word broke something inside her. She covered her mouth with trembling hands as sobs escaped her. She pushed back her chair, rising slowly, almost unsteadily, and took one small step toward him. For a moment, it was like time reversed. She wasn't the exhausted, worn-down woman who had been humiliated in this house for years. She was just a mother, finally seeing the son she thought she had lost forever. Adrian crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She clung to him like she might drown if she let go. He held her just as tightly, his chin resting on her hair, his jaw clenched. "I'm sorry," Adrian whispered, his voice low but breaking. "I should have come sooner. I should have never left you." Caroline cleared her throat sharply, trying to regain control. "Well," she said, her voice thin but laced with forced sweetness, "this is quite the surprise. Adrian Cole, in our home. We didn't realize you were family." Adrian slowly pulled back from our mother, his expression shifting. The warmth in his eyes hardened into steel as he turned to face Caroline. "You didn't realize?" he repeated, his tone cold. "Or you didn't care?" Caroline blinked, her lips parting as if to respond, but Adrian didn't give her the chance. "For years, my mother has walked into this house with dignity, and for years, you've treated her like a servant. You humiliated her. You used her. And you sat at this table while she worked in your kitchen." The silence in the room was suffocating. Caroline's face flushed red. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting to Daniel like he might step in and rescue them. But Daniel looked like he was about to collapse. Adrian's gaze shifted to him. "And you?" His voice dropped lower, darker. "You thought it was funny to order my mother around like she was staff? To laugh about her in front of your friends? To treat her like she was nothing?" Daniel swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. He opened his mouth to speak, but his words came out thin, desperate. I didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke. A joke." Adrian's laugh was short, sharp, and humorless. "Tell me, Daniel, did my mother look like she was laughing?" Daniel's silence was the only answer. Adrian took a step closer to the table, his presence filling the room like a storm. "Let me make this clear. My mother is the reason I am standing here today. She worked herself to the bone so I could go to school. She sacrificed everything so I could build the life I have. And you," his eyes swept across all of them, "you sat here mocking her, degrading her, pretending you were better because you were born with money." Caroline's mask cracked. "Now wait just a minute." "No," Adrian's voice cut through hers like a blade. "You don't get to speak. You don't get to rewrite this. You've made her feel small for too long. Tonight that ends. The air in the room grew heavy. For the first time in years, I felt like someone had given me permission to breathe. And then Adrian turned his eyes on me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My chest tightened, my throat closed. Tears blurred my vision. I had waited for this, longed for this, for so many years. Emily, he said softly, the steel in his voice melting into something gentler. I'm sorry. I left you when you needed me. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again. I broke. The dam inside me burst, and tears streamed down my face. I rose from my chair, nearly stumbling as I rushed toward him. When he caught me in his arms, I felt like a child again. Safe, protected, whole. I missed you, I sobbed into his chest. You promised you'd come back. I thought you forgot us. I never forgot, Adrian said, his voice shaking as he held me tighter. Every deal I made, every step I took, I did it for us. For you. For Mom. I thought if I became successful enough, it would erase the years of struggle. But I was wrong. None of it mattered if I wasn't here with you. Behind us, Caroline shifted uncomfortably. Well, this is all very touching, she said stiffly. But this is still our home and... Adrian's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. Your home? That's funny. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been living in mine. Caroline's eyes widened in confusion. Excuse me. Adrian let go of me slowly, his voice calm but deadly. You never thought to check, did you? All those years you sat here looking down on my mother, you never bothered to ask who owned the roof over your head. The Rivers family stared at him, stunned. Adrian's lips curved into a small cold smile. Congratulations, Caroline. Tonight, you're dining in a house that belongs to me. Caroline's jaw dropped open at Adrian's words. For the first time since I had married into this family, I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. The ever-polished woman who always had a smirk ready, who always knew exactly what to say to cut someone down. She had nothing. Her lips parted, then closed again, like she was trying to form a defense but couldn't find the words. What? What do you mean this is your house? Amanda blurted out, her voice shrill with panic. She leaned forward in her chair, her eyes darting from Adrian to her mother. Mom, tell me he's lying. Adrian stepped away from me and moved closer to the table. His movements were calm, controlled, but every step radiated authority. He placed one hand on the back of a chair, his eyes sweeping across them all. I mean exactly what I said, he replied evenly. 3 years ago, when Robert's business was drowning in debt, when you were days away from losing everything. Guess who stepped in? Guess who bought the properties under shell companies so no one would know? Guess who kept your so-called legacy from collapsing like a house of cards? The silence in the room was deafening. Caroline's face drained of color. Robert's hands clenched on the tablecloth, the veins in his temples pulsing. It was me, Adrian continued, his voice cutting through the silence like glass shattering. I bought this house. I paid off your debts. I made sure your name didn't rot in the newspapers. And while I was doing that, while I was keeping your precious reputation intact, you sat here mocking my mother, humiliating her under the very roof I owned. Caroline let out a shaky laugh, the sound brittle. This is ridiculous. You expect us to believe. Check the deed, Adrian interrupted sharply, his tone like a whip. Call your lawyer. Call your banker. The name won't say Adrian Cole. I was careful. But follow the trail, Caroline. Every shell company, every transfer, it all leads back to me. Amanda's eyes widened. No. That can't be true. Dad. She turned to Robert, panic written across her face. Robert said nothing. His face was hard, but I saw it, the flicker of recognition, of shame, of realization. He knew Adrian wasn't lying. You knew, Adrian said, his gaze locking onto Robert. You didn't know it was me, maybe. But you knew someone saved you. You just didn't care enough to ask who. You were too busy pretending you were still the powerful Robert Rivers, instead of a man one step away from bankruptcy. Robert's fists clenched tighter, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. Daniel finally spoke, his voice trembling. This changes nothing. He straightened his shoulders, forcing his confidence back, though his hands shook. So you bought some property. So what? You don't belong here, Adrian. This is my family. Emily is my wife. You can't just walk in here and... Adrian turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. Your wife? He repeated softly, dangerously. You mean the woman you've spent years breaking down? The woman you silenced, mocked, and paraded around like a trophy while treating her mother like dirt. Daniel flinched, his mask slipping again. You don't understand. That's just how things are in families like ours. There are roles. Expectations. Emily knows that. Does she? Adrian asked, his voice dropping lower. Or has she just been too scared to fight back because you've convinced her she's nothing without you? The words pierced me. My chest tightened. For so long, I had lived in that silence, believing I was powerless. But hearing Adrian say it out loud felt like someone shining a light on chains I had ignored for years. Daniel turned to me, desperation flashing in his eyes. Emily, tell him. Tell him it's not like that. Tell him you're happy here. I opened my mouth. For years, I had wanted to say the truth, but the words always got stuck. Fear always won. But not this time. I looked at Daniel, really looked at him. The man I had once thought was my savior, my fairy tale. And all I saw was a stranger who had stolen my voice. No, I whispered, my voice trembling but firm. I'm not happy. I haven't been happy since the day I married you. The room went silent. Daniel's face turned red, his lips pressing into a thin line. Caroline's composure cracked further. Emily, don't be dramatic, she snapped, her voice shrill. You've been given everything. Clothes, money, a name. Things you could never have dreamed of without my son. And this is how you repay us? With lies. My mother finally spoke, her voice hoarse but steady. She had been silent for most of the evening, but now she lifted her chin, tears still wet on her face. They're not lies, she said softly. I've watched my daughter shrink in this house. I've watched her light go out. You gave her money, yes. But you took everything else from her. Her dreams. Her voice. Her joy. If that's wealth, then I'd rather stay poor forever. Adrian's eyes softened as he looked at her, then hardened again as he turned back to the Rivers family. You don't own her, Adrian said firmly, his words echoing in the heavy silence. And you don't own my mother. Not anymore. Not ever again. Amanda pushed her chair back suddenly, her face pale. Mom. We need to do something. We can't let him talk to us like this. Caroline's hands trembled as she reached for her glass. For the first time, the Rivers matriarch had no plan, no clever remark, no cutting line to restore her control. The power she had wielded so effortlessly for years was slipping away, right in front of everyone. Adrian leaned forward, his voice low and final. Here's what's going to happen. From this day on, my mother will never step foot in this house to scrub your dishes or peel your potatoes again. She is your equal. And if you can't treat her that way, then you don't deserve her presence. And Emily? He turned toward me, his eyes gentle now. Emily will decide for herself what her life will look like. Not you. Not Daniel. Not anyone else. Tears welled in my eyes. For the first time in years, I felt something bloom inside me. Something I thought was gone forever. Strength. Daniel slammed his fist on the table suddenly, his voice rising. This is my marriage. You don't get to interfere. Adrian didn't even flinch. He leaned back, his lips curving into the faintest smile. Marriage? Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, it looks more like a prison. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. And for the first time I saw it too. Clearly. My marriage wasn't a life. It was a cage. And the key had just been handed to me. The silence that followed Adrian's words was suffocating. You could almost hear the chandelier humming above us, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. The Rivers family, once so smug, so untouchable, sat stunned at their own dining table like chess pieces cornered in checkmate. Daniel was the first to break. His face flushed crimson, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. He leaned across the table, pointing a shaking finger at Adrian. You think you can walk in here and destroy everything I've built? You think money makes you better than me? He spat, his voice cracking with rage. Adrian tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing but his voice calm. Better than you? No. Just not cruel. Not a coward who hides behind wealth and tradition to excuse mistreating the people who deserve your respect. Daniel's eyes burned with fury. He slammed his hand against the table so hard that the wine glasses rattled. You don't know what it takes to hold a family together. You've been gone for years, Adrian. Years. Where were you when Emily needed you? Where were you when she married me? Don't stand there acting like a savior now. Adrian's expression didn't waver, but his jaw tightened. You're right, he admitted, his voice low. I wasn't here. And that's my greatest regret. But unlike you, I won't hide behind excuses. I left and I failed them. But I'm here now. And I won't let you keep breaking them. My heart raced as I sat frozen, caught between them. Daniel's eyes flicked to me, desperate, furious, demanding loyalty. Emily, he balked, his voice harsh. Say something. Tell him he's wrong. Tell him you're my wife and you belong here, with me. For so many years, I would have obeyed. For so many years, I would have swallowed my truth, told him what he wanted to hear, and kept the fragile peace. But something had changed tonight. Adrian's words had cracked open the silence I'd been trapped in, and I couldn't push it all back inside anymore. I stood slowly, my legs trembling but my voice steady. I don't belong to you, I said quietly. Daniel froze. His face twisted with disbelief. What did you just say? I repeated, louder this time. I don't belong to you. I never did. You didn't marry me, Daniel. You married an idea. A trophy, a doll you could polish and control. You didn't love me. You loved what I made you look like. The words tumbled out of me, faster now, stronger. My chest heaved as years of silence poured into sound. You laughed at me. You silenced me. You mocked my mother while I sat there dying inside because I didn't have the courage to fight you. But I'm done. I'm done pretending this is a marriage. I'm done letting you tell me who I am. My voice cracked at the last words, but I didn't care. The tears streaming down my face weren't weakness anymore. They were release. Daniel stared at me like he didn't recognize me, his mouth opening and closing as if trying to piece together what had just happened. Then, his expression hardened. He reached for my arm across the table, his grip tight, desperate. You're not leaving me, he hissed, his voice low but sharp. You hear me? You'll never survive without me. You're nothing without this family. Nothing. Before I could pull back, Adrian's hand shot forward. He grabbed Daniel's wrist in an iron grip, his voice cutting through the tension like thunder. Don't touch her. The air between them crackled. Daniel tried to jerk his hand free, but Adrian's grip didn't budge. His calm was terrifying, far more dangerous than Daniel's rage. You're wrong about one thing, Adrian said quietly, his eyes locked onto Daniel's. She's not nothing. She's everything. More than you'll ever be. Daniel's face twisted, veins bulging at his temples. He yanked his hand back finally, stumbling a step away like Adrian's touch had burned him. His chest heaved as he pointed toward the door. Get out, he screamed. Get out of my house. Adrian smiled, cold and sharp. Your house. He spread his arms slightly, his gaze sweeping across the lavish dining room. Daniel, you're standing in my house. Every inch of this marble floor, every chandelier, every wall, it belongs to me. And so does every debt tied around your father's neck. Caroline gasped audibly, her hand clutching at her pearls. Amanda's face crumpled, panic written across her features. Daniel faltered, the truth hitting him like a blow. His rage flickered into something else. Fear. Adrian took a step closer, his voice dropping lower. You've built your life on power you never had. You've hidden behind your family name, but it's hollow. Without my help, you'd have nothing. You'd be nothing. The word nothing lingered in the air. Heavy, deliberate. Daniel had used it against me for years, whispering it like poison until I believed it. But hearing Adrian throw it back at him, with all the force of truth, was like watching chains shatter. My mother stood suddenly, her voice trembling but strong. We're leaving. All eyes turned to her. She clutched her purse, her back straight for the first time in years. She looked at me, her eyes shining with both sorrow and pride. Emily, come with me. You don't need to stay here another second. Daniel's face contorted in rage. She's my wife. She doesn't walk out of here. Adrian stepped between us, his frame a shield. His eyes never left Daniel's as he said, steady and certain, "Yes, she does." The room was silent except for the pounding of my heart. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I looked at Daniel one last time. The man I had once believed was my fairy tale ending. All I saw was a stranger drowning in his own pride. Without a word, I walked toward my mother. My steps were shaky, but each one felt like freedom. Adrian followed behind us, his presence like a wall between me and the past I was finally leaving behind. At the doorway, I turned back just once. The Rivers family sat in stunned silence, Caroline clutching her pearls, Amanda pale and speechless, Robert stone-faced but hollow-eyed, Daniel shaking with fury he couldn't control. 4 years, I had been their captive. Tonight, I walked out free. And as the door closed behind me, I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. The night air hit my face as the heavy front door of the Rivers mansion closed behind us. For a moment, I just stood there on the stone steps, breathing in deeply, as though my lungs had been starved for years and were finally filling again. My mother was at my side, holding my arm tightly, as though she was afraid I might falter. Adrian stood just behind us, silent, steady, like a shadow that promised safety. The street was quiet. The glow of the mansion's windows behind us was bright, but I didn't look back. For years I had looked over my shoulder, always wondering if I was being judged, if I was good enough, if I was acceptable in their eyes. Tonight, for the first time, I didn't care. We walked to Adrian's car parked at the curb, a sleek black vehicle that reflected the streetlights like a mirror. My mother hesitated as she slid into the back seat, her hands trembling. I still can't believe you're here," she whispered, her voice breaking. Adrian leaned down, his voice soft. "I should have come sooner, Mom. I thought distance was protecting you, but all it did was leave you alone. I promise you, those days are over. You'll never be alone again." Her tears fell freely, but this time they weren't from humiliation. They were from relief. The drive away from the mansion felt surreal. I stared out the window as the city lights passed by, my mind replaying everything that had happened inside those walls. Caroline's sharp tongue silenced, Robert's stone mask cracking, Amanda's smugness shattered, Daniel's rage collapsing into fear. For so long I had lived in their cage, but tonight I had seen the bars bend and break. Adrian's voice pulled me back. "Emily," he said gently, his eyes flicking to me in the rearview mirror. "You don't have to decide everything tonight. You've been through enough. But I need you to hear me when I say this. You are not weak. You never were. They convinced you that silence was strength, but real strength is what you showed tonight. Standing up, speaking out." My throat tightened. I had dreamed of hearing words like that for years, but believing them was harder. Still, with Adrian's voice steady, my mother's hand gripping mine, and the mansion fading further behind us, I felt something inside me stir. Something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. We arrived at Adrian's penthouse, a space so different from the suffocating grandeur of the Rivers mansion. It wasn't filled with antique furniture meant to show off wealth. It wasn't decorated to impress strangers. It was warm, open, modern, and alive. Adrian insisted we sit, eat, and rest. My mother kept apologizing, saying she didn't want to be a burden, but Adrian shook his head firmly. "You were never a burden," he said. "You're the reason I am who I am. Everything I have is because of you. This is your home now, as much as it is mine." She broke down again, but this time she smiled through her tears. Later that night, when my mother had finally fallen asleep in the guest room, I stood by the wide glass windows overlooking the city. My reflection stared back at me, the same face, the same eyes, but I didn't feel like the same woman. Adrian joined me, standing quietly for a while before speaking. "What are you thinking?" I swallowed hard. "I'm thinking, how did I let it go on for so long? How did I not see what was happening to me?" He shook his head. "Because they wanted you to believe you were powerless. That's how control works. It blinds you. But the fact that you stood up tonight proves you were never powerless. You just needed to remember who you were." I turned to him, my voice trembling. "And who am I?" His eyes softened. "You're Emily Cole. My sister. Mom's daughter. A woman who still has dreams, even if she's buried them under years of silence. You can still chase them. You can still live for yourself. It's not too late. The words sank into me slowly, like rain soaking dry earth. For so long, I had believed I was nothing without Daniel. But Adrian was right. I had a name, a family, a strength that didn't come from being Mrs. Rivers. It came from being Emily. The days that followed were not easy. Daniel called, screamed, begged, threatened. Caroline sent letters dripping with venom, accusing me of betrayal. Amanda posted sly remarks online, trying to twist the story into something that made her family look like victims. But for once, none of it touched me. Every time the phone rang, every time a letter arrived, Adrian and my mother were there, reminding me I wasn't alone. I met with a lawyer. I filed for divorce. For the first time in years, I made a choice for myself. When Daniel stormed into the courtroom weeks later, demanding control, demanding loyalty, I stood tall. I looked him in the eyes and said the words I once thought I'd never be strong enough to say. I don't need you. I never did. And for the first time he believed it. Months later, I found myself in a classroom again. Not as a student, not as someone afraid of failing, but as a teacher. The chalk in my hand, the laughter of children in the room, the sound of possibility. It was everything I had once dreamed of. I had thought that dream was dead. But it was waiting, just like me, for the right time to live again. My mother came to every open house, beaming with pride as if I had already won the world. Adrian often sat in the back row quietly, his presence a steady reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. One evening, as I closed the classroom door, I paused, letting the quiet settle around me. I thought about the mansion, the humiliation, the years I had lost. But I didn't feel bitterness. I felt gratitude. Because those years had taught me something I would never forget. No matter how much money, power or reputation someone has, it means nothing if it's built on cruelty. True strength is not in silencing others. It's in lifting them up. True family is not the one that breaks you to pieces, but the one that gathers those pieces and helps you stand again. I wasn't nothing. I was more than enough. And as I walked into the cool evening air, I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, but certain it was true. I'm free.